Demon Hunter, right. Yep. I'm fascinated for this one because, I remember Havoc's always been a bit of a mixed bag for me. And I actually mained it for patch 8.3.
So you did.
And going into Shadowlands, it was weird because I had fun, but I just knew I can't stick with this. It just doesn't have it for me. And I guess I'm now interested because, yeah.
It does now.
They've actually... Well, it seems like there's things like, say, momentum that had existed in the past, but people didn't really like using.
It's weird because I think people...
It was more of a thing now.
It was...
I haven't touched it in Shadowlands, of course.
Very strong in Legion. For a lot of it, because I remember Player McGill was really into like the super hardcore stuff, like really super min-maxing DPS and like the hard specs, and they would play like... They would play the kind of rogue, the death from above's exactly when it's up, even if it'll kill them. So I had to have spell warding or bop or lay on hands handy to save them. But they played momentum a lot of time, even though it was like way harder than it was worth compared to demonic. They were like, yeah, give me that, give me the hard one, and that was when it was like pretty low uptime because it was. I think it was just because Fell Rush had a longer cooldown or something back then. But it was kind of hard to keep it up, and I didn't think it lasted that long, but it was pretty effective. Whereas now they've kind of changed it, so momentum is... I saw Max complain about this, and I think it's where some things have went in the game where the skill ceiling's slightly down because it lasts longer and it's not quite as big a window of damage anymore. So it's like less punishing and easier to play around, and it has more things attached, like initiative, where Vengeful Retreat resets initiative, which is an extra 20% crit chance for like 12-14 seconds, which is really nice. So there's a little bit of working around that, but momentum itself is a bit kind of weaker overall, especially when the hunt is back, and then Unbound Chaos means you're using Fell Rush rotationally anyway after you immolate, so that's kind of where it makes it a little bit easier. But then one thing is any means necessary, and this is where the build stuff comes in. And I said about Unholy there, I want to talk about how historically, outside of like Shadowlands, where it was like based on people did have different builds based on Covenants largely, historically a lot of this game went with your gear's worth so much, but you're probably going to use this build all the time. And there was very little that ever went, hey, if you have X stat or Y gear, don't use this build, use this build. And that was basically for legendaries only. But now there's a case, and this is still theoretical, but any means necessary is a new capstone talent for Havoc that basically, I believe it changes their arcane fire and something else damage to chaos and increases the effectivity of their mastery, which is to increase their chaos damage done and also the move speed. So they now have a thing of, hey, you want to stack a load of mastery and use the mastery build? You could theoretically do that if it's balanced enough that actually works. And that changes their entire damage profile and output. And I put so much more of it into like, obviously they're not going to have momentum in that case. They want to go for like a Shattered Destiny, I think, and then that. But that's where like you get Rage Fire on the way down, which is this Immolation Aura builds up an explosion at the end. So they actually have a different build now that they can like, that substantially feels a bit different. And they're also swimming in resources. Like most, this is another thing that I want to say. Most classes in this game now swim in resources.
Do you think that's intent, or is it just current tuning? I guess it's leaning more towards intent now that we're closer to launch.
It feels like intent because it feels like, okay. It feels like intent, but it also feels like as a natural event of more talents. Because in the hunt to give you meaningful talents, they have to give you meaningful talents, right?
Yeah.
Which means you now have more access to more stuff than you did before. So obviously people talk about like pre-patch feeling really busted because you've got like talents and then you've got your Shadowlands legendaries. Obviously your conduits are fairly strong, but the idea of like you remove some specs will be able to keep that legendary because they'll get an extra 5 points in the talent tree. They get 2 capstones. So there's a lot of stuff. It's like you have a crazy resource sometimes. It's like an example I have. I'll talk about Outlaw Rogue later, but having access to Dread Blades, which works on Restless Blades, and 7 combo points max. 7 combo point cooldown reduction means you like every time you dispatch, you get like, was it something like 7 point? No, it's either 7 or 10.5 second cooldown reduction per full combo point dispatch, which you do every other global. So you have this crazy uptime and like all of your abilities because talents work together in such an interesting way now. So it is very much intent where like, because if it was the same on a couple of specs, but not others, I would kind of go, okay, sure. But like Fury Warrior, Arms Warrior, and obviously a lot of the rage stuff comes from the spec tree itself. You could go, oh, well, same developer. Freljord, tons of resources. Balance, less much. Some of the casters maybe not feeling this way. But like if you have a resource bar, expect it to be full a lot more often. Even playing, I played Elisham in a dungeon. And I was like, I'm wasting so much Maelstrom. Because I'm trying to focus on like using the electrified shocks and chain lightning and getting electrified shocks to proc off that. And I was like, wait, I have to sit and hit, like, I'm almost feeling frustrated having to cast Elemental Blast because I can't dump my Maelstrom fast enough because I've got so much, especially in AoE where I think a lot of people do, like, you end up doing more AoE than single target in the game on average because trash and M+ compared to raid. And it's just like, you just have so much stuff. Windwalker Monk's another example, as Abe mentioned. Windwalker's just, if you run out of energy and chi, you've done something very wrong. Which just means it's less how do I resource manage? And it's more, how do I use my resources most effectively per second? It's now, oh shit, I'm running out of energy and I don't have chi. Isn't the problem? It's, I'm going to cap on energy. How do I dump enough chi to get my Tiger Strikes? Or my Tiger Palm in with Power Strikes? And it feels, because I know this is one thing, I'm really, sorry, I should also say Prop Paladin don't default power generation from Avenger Shield, which is the opposite of what I'm talking about, but that's because of tank balancing and shielded righteous uptime being not meaningful and stuff. But there's something that Preach was saying when he was speaking to, I can't remember who it is, but it was someone who was in an interview with Holinka. And they were speaking to the both, I'm sorry, I don't remember who it is, but I believe on stream he said something to the effect of, this is like, kind of like the new guy on combat, and it's like this guy's responsible for like basically World of Warcraft combat going forward. And if we'll have to see the like any philosophical changes about combat from the interview, but if it goes into like stuff like this, I'm like, yeah, this clearly seems to be important. Where they're going, this game is way faster. This game is way faster and on average way more complex.
That's interesting because another time where the game was very quick was Mists of Pandaria.
Yeah.
A lot of things going on. You had a lot of toys. And after that, we started to see, the prune, right? There was the prune that happened. A lot of specs getting a bit slower. Sometimes friction between players and developers where players would be angry over downtime. Devs would be like, oh, well, that's kind of... Oh, we intended that.
Part of pacing, yeah.
It's pacing. Oh dear. Whereas evidently the kind of faster stuff has... It's ended up being more successful, I suppose.
Yeah. So coming from the lens of someone who's like I was talking about, like the attention to detail before, in terms of if you put more in, you'll get more out. I think that's definitely the case with these classes now more than ever before with talents, and it ends up being everyone's like really resource rich, and you can play like hell, and you never feel like you've really messed up, largely, and it feels like there's a lot more. There'll likely be a lot more variance between player skill, I imagine, which will make the stats for like Warcraft log stuff look really interesting, I think. It'll probably make the jump between like 95th percentile, 50th percentile way bigger, which is very, it's exactly, I think, is the video on Talents Live? No, it's not.
No.
So there's a video, I think, coming out tomorrow, I think, is it? I don't know. Maybe. Okay, well, there's a video coming out soon, and there's a hypothesis in that, which is Blizzard, are so aware of the meta problem and the balancing problem that they've decided you want cookie cutter builds? We will make it so complicated that you can't figure out the cookie cutter. We're going to give you so much choice that anything will probably work within reason. And I think that's kind of been apparent in terms of like the overall philosophy of you can do whatever you want and it'll probably work if you try hard enough. Obviously there'll still be like at the top level there'll be imbalances. But it seems like it'll just be in the middle. It'll just be crazy variance, but it's all like kind of fun, maybe, ideally. It's very interesting. Where are we at for classes? Yes. Yeah, Vengeance. If it ain't broke, don't fix it. But it's got a couple of nice changes. Like, I think Frailty no longer being literally tied to Spirit Bomb is good. Spirit Bomb is still substantially better for applying frailty, as I understand, but it's like now you can not take Spirit Bomb and not feel like you've completely and utterly gimped yourself.
That's nice.
Which is a good change.
Yeah.
Yeah, they also have like access to Chaos Nova and Darkness now, which is nice. I think that's pretty interesting. It is kind of it is awkward that there's like a couple of classes, and Demon Hunter's one of them. I think like Druid might be one of them, where there's some throughput that you might want on the class tree.
Yeah.
So it's like, do I pick extra numbers or do I pick extra utility? And that can be a bit of an issue. But generally speaking, it's like you can have everything cool and fun. It's going to be very, very strong based on how it can do kind of everything it wants all day long and never die. Obviously, tuning can impact somewhat, but it is really interesting, especially when... there's just so many cool things. Like Fodder to the Flame being there is like a really nice mini game now, where you throw Glaive the Fodder to the Flame Demon, and it gives you a Demon Soul for a big burst of stuff. And just having that there is like not a super expensive talent, just a reasonable talent. Like, that's a cool thing to do. And the difference between someone who can Glaive the Fodder early in a fight for max DPS on a load of things, or just let it die to cleave, is interesting. People who can maximize that, like, I think it was 15 or 20 seconds of change recently of extra damage, is like, that's a nice bit of complexity that high-end players will appreciate, but other players will just get for free and get to play around with, which is interesting. And there's also, and this has always been the case, right? But tanks often choose in their trees and their builds, do I take more damage or do I do less damage?
Yeah.
Do I, am I tankier or am I more damagey? And the talent trees really support this for like most of them, especially Vengeance and Prot Paladin are good ones for this. And like, for tank players, that's a pretty meaningful choice. I think that's very nice.